and Resource Center, and it was really, really demanding. I was in charge of developing the whole program and running a legislative effort. So I didn't have that much time to go to appointments for, prenatal appointments when I became pregnant with my first child. And even right up till the 8th month, I was running around. I went to a conference a couple hours south of where we lived, and I skipped all of the appointments I should have been at. And the close to my pregnancy, but maybe 4 weeks early, I went into labor, and I all of a sudden was in a great deal of difficulty. So would you like to hear that story?
Yes, please.
No? Okay. So we were about 4 weeks away from my supposed delivery date, and I was home from a conference, and I wasn't feeling well. And we had just come back from going out to eat Chinese food, ironically, because people say when you eat Chinese food, it induces labor. But I was 4 weeks early. My husband actually didn't want to take me in. And finally we called, and they said, "Oh, please come right in." And when I came in, almost instantly, I was in an emergency situation because my blood pressure was off the charts. They did a blood test, and they could see that my platelets weren't working, and they did some other tests and realized my liver wasn't working. And I was lying on this stretcher in a room with the physician, the neonatologist, and the midwife. And Dr. Simmons is yelling to Maria Cabri, she's crashing. We need to get her into the OR. And almost immediately everything happened all at once, of it being an emergency. And the interesting thing is, I worked at the medical school, and these people were my colleagues. I was in maternal and child health and community medicine. That's my project, which combined the two. And so I was surrounded by people who actually knew me pretty well. And the next thing I knew, I was looking at the physician's face on one side of me at the foot of my, I don't know, it's a gurney, I guess. And I was looking at Marie's face. And all of a sudden, the essence of my being was in a corner of the room, looking down at everything, looking at them, and looking at myself. And I really didn't feel much of anything at that point. I felt totally dispassionate, just observing the situation, and then nothing. So what happened is I did almost die. In fact, my colleagues said that later, that they hadn't had anybody get so close to dying and not dying as me. I'm not sure. It was a strange statement for them to say, but that's what they said. And I was so sick, they put me into a 3-day coma with mag sulfate, just because so many of my body systems were shutting down. They wanted to give everybody a rest. And my son was born really sick too. He was the size of the palm of my hand. He was tiny, and they put him in an isolate. That's what they called him at the time. It was like a little incubator. So I came to about 3 days later, to two physicians telling me, and they were colleagues of mine, that my child would not thrive, that he probably was going to have cognitive disabilities and physical disabilities. And actually, when they brought him in for me to try to nurse him, he had a stop breathing episode, and they had to bring him straight out back to the intensive care unit. So it was a very, very rocky few weeks. I was really sick. I was in the hospital 2 more weeks, and my son was also in the hospital a couple more weeks. And even when I got out, I had some sort of seizure activity, and wound up having to go back in for a little while. So I was struggling quite a bit.
I can imagine. And I think especially being a new mother, everything is just new, and you're just trying to figure everything out. And then next to just giving birth for the first time, you're going through those events for the first time ever. And yet you have such a rocky experience, not only with your health, but that of your son. So what was going through your mind at the time? What were you feeling? Were
Well, I was,
you
yeah.
conscious a lot? Were you also conscious during that time?
I was unconscious for those 3 days, and when I came to, I stayed conscious, but very kind of. I wasn't anxious. It was weird. Even when these two doctors, whom I trusted, said that my son was going to have issues, I didn't incorporate that into my being for some reason. I don't know why, because I'm generally a warrior, but I did not worry about his future. I just thought we would do whatever it took to support him. But I also was so wobbly that I didn't have time to process much other than getting through each day. And the interesting thing, if you fast forward into my first son's life, he wound up being, not a really huge person. I'm tiny, but he wound up valedictorian of his class and wrestling captain and even prom king. In America, we have proms, big dances at the end of your last year of school or second to last year. And he was prom king. So he turned out okay. Although his first couple of years were rocky. We had to wait till he was 5 pounds before we could even visit any relatives. And we took his whole first 2 or 3 years of life were, lung issues and issues of growth. And he didn't walk till he was, I don't know, 14 months, but he did start talking at 9 months, which made us realize, well, there's something going on there. So anyway, but it was tough. And I didn't mention that experience to anybody except Bruce because I had no idea what to make of it. I mean, I didn't even have the words back then to say, oh, that was a near-death experience, even though very specifically I was told never to get pregnant again because I had the HELP syndrome. And when you have it that severe, they can't predict whether it would happen again. But then I did get pregnant again fairly soon after with my second son. And the whole department, actually 3 or 4 people took me aside and said, we've never seen anybody so sick who didn't die. I told you that before. And we just think you should end the pregnancy, which I did not do. I just did not do it. I felt like I didn't want to do that. And the pregnancy actually went fine. But so I didn't tell anybody about that first experience except for Bruce.
So I wanted to zoom in a bit more into that. Bruce being your husband, I also wanted to clarify. So what did you make of that experience yourself? Of course, you didn't have the vocabulary. You probably didn't know that other people have been through near-death experiences. So how did you reason it to yourself? What did you think happened? Did you think about it?
I didn't think about it a ton because I had to hit the ground running. I had to go back to work within about a month, and I was wobbly at work, but I had a lot of responsibilities. I was trying to get laws passed and study ways to intervene in terms of all of the accidental injuries in New Hampshire. So I had a lot on my plate. But when I did think about it, in my heart, I thought, well, I think I almost died. And possibly that's what happens when you almost die. I couldn't really make any sense out of it. It didn't affect me. That particular experience didn't affect me so much, except I've always had this drive to squeeze the life out of every day. And I think that was certainly the case. And I didn't take my life for granted, and I didn't take my children's lives for granted. Like I went out to be pregnant 3 more times, and each pregnancy was I have 3 children, and I had 1 pregnancy unfortunately end at 7 months pregnancy. So I guess that's 4 pregnancies. Anyway, I didn't take pregnancy lightly. Each time I became pregnant, I thought, well, you just don't know what's going to happen. You can't predict. And with my history, it was a little scary. But
I can imagine. And I can only commend you for the courage that you've shown. I mean, to go through this much health issues with your first pregnancy and then going ahead with 3 more pregnancies.
yeah, and I don't.
It's amazing.
Yeah, and I would never in a billion years judge anybody who decided not to go through a pregnancy with that. In fact, I feel very, very certain about it. I felt certain that I would not want to end that little life in me, but I also feel certain that if anybody were in that situation with my kind of background, that is your choice. And was it courage or was it just magical thinking that everything would turn out all right? And it did not turn all right for my third pregnancy. We lost that child at 7 months, and that was devastating because I always had this kind of global sense that everything always would be okay, and it wasn't. The child died in utero at 7 months, and I was devastated. And it's funny, I've never gotten over that death, even though I went on to have another child after that when I was 42, which was sort of a miracle because when I lost that third pregnancy, they said, "Oh, you won't be able to get pregnant again." And I did. It was a big surprise, and I did. We were very happy. But even to this day, sometimes if I'm in a setting and someone lifts a baby to their shoulders and I see that baby and I think of the pregnancy we lost, I'll get teary, which is, I don't know what to say about that, but that's me.
No, of course, I can absolutely imagine. And I've had friends that have gone through losing a child.
Yeah.
And I definitely think it's probably the worst feeling that you can experience in life. And I also agree that it's probably something that you never really can get over. But I think this is a good opportunity to zoom in, if you will, on how do you move forward? Because it's not just a matter of forgetting or, I think a lot of times in life we have setbacks and we're being told in terms of a career or in terms of anything, you just push through, you just move on. And I think with feelings, it's definitely something that you find a way to move forward day by day, but without really forgetting what happened. And I don't think that the hurt ever minimizes.
Yeah.
Right, but you do find a way to again find joy in life. So if you will, could you speak
Sure.
a bit about how you found a path forward?
Well, I think joy and suffering exist hand in hand, and if you don't allow yourself to feel the suffering that you feel, you really can numb yourself toward the joy you feel. When I first right after I lost that pregnancy, I sort of felt like God had told me everything was going to be okay. And I was just so hurt. I was just thinking, how could God allow this to happen to me in my life, especially after I sensed that reassurance. But I think I had a bigger picture as the years went on that God to me does not promise, especially not in the Bible. My background is Christian, although Buddhists say the same thing. Buddhists say life is suffering, period. That's one of the tenets of Buddhism. And in the Christian Bible, it also says in 1 Peter, don't be surprised when you go through fiery trials. And then in Romans 5, it says, once again, like, don't be surprised about the suffering, and suffering produces perseverance, and perseverance produces character, and character produces hope. And for me, it's that hope that is very important. One of the things that experience of losing that pregnancy did for me is really opened up my mind and heart to other people who had fertility issues or other people who lost their children. It wound up me feeling more empathy and compassion for those people, and that you just walk through it together, And I lost a pregnancy. I didn't lose a child who was alive. And I think that's a hugely different experience, but maybe the process is the same, to embrace that sadness, but also not forget to look at the joy that is around you in the world.
Absolutely. I think that's very well put and very wise words. And I think even though sometimes it feels like you're going through difficult times, there's still joy to be had, and there's still good moments ahead of you. And sort of being able to let yourself feel that, the bad, but then also the good. I think it's really important. So then I wanted to move towards your second NDE, because you've had another near-death experience. So what happened between the first and the second?
Okay, between the first and the second, we wound up having 2 kids, and then a third later. I have 10 years apart between the kids. But I'll fast forward to that evening. It was a Valentine's Day. It was the night of Valentine's Day, and that's a time where we will frequently go out ourselves with other couples and, exchange cards declaring our love for one another, and then have a nice meal. So it was Valentine's night, and we were supposed to meet 3 other couples downtown at a restaurant called The Local, and it's a couple of mile, maybe 4 or 5 mile drive. It was a brutally cold night, no snow or ice on the ground. There might have been snow, but there's no ice on the ground, and it was crystal clear night. And usually get dressed up, and I thought, oh, I'm not going to get dressed up in this kind of cold, so I wore wool slacks and I wore a sweater, and then I wore my mother's wool Chesterfield coat, which is this really heavy, thick coat. And I've probably worn it 2 or 3 times in my life. And it's herringbone, and you put it on and you feel like you've got the weight of the world on you. So one of the couples that were supposed to be with us got sick. So I had made chicken soup and bread to bring to them on our way to the restaurant. And there are 2 kind of biggish intersections in town. And we were approaching one, and I looked up and I saw the most beautiful green light. And here in America, the green light means you get to go through the intersection without stopping. And I remember thinking to myself, that light is so pretty and crystal clear and so big and green. For some reason, and I thought, great, we'll be able to get to Amy's house, drop off the soup and bread, and get to the restaurant without any kind of delay, because we've got a nice green light here. And then the next thing I know, as we're approaching the intersection, I'll tell you my experience, and then I'll tell you what happened that I found out later. I see us going through the intersection, and I see some lights coming at us, not by us. And then the next thing I know, I'm in this yellow space. It's as if I dropped into a vat of yellow pudding, and not in a bad way. It's completely surrounded by this kind of yellow glow. And I say the word I, but I'm not sure I existed. I didn't necessarily feel an attachment to me as Deborah Prum. I felt the most profound peace, and almost a quiet joy, not like a happiness, bouncy joy, but I felt at peace, and I felt more at home in that space than I've ever felt. I don't feel at home anywhere for some reason, generally on earth. I don't know why. And I am not a calm person. I'm pretty much always thinking about something and running around in circles trying to do it. But I felt this, and it felt timeless. I couldn't tell you that I was there a minute or a century. And at a certain stage, I began hearing something, which was like my husband's frantic voice. Because at one point he said, he's a physician, and he said he thought I was out like more than 3 minutes, possibly 4. And to this day, I feel sort of guilty about it. I didn't want to come back. I mean, I don't know where I was. but I didn't want to come back. And then I sort of reluctantly came back, and I came back to this crazy scene of my husband's glasses broken, blood coming down his face. And I'm Italian. I'm always, olive skin. He's always kind of pale, but he was really pale, and he has red hair, and he looks frantic. And in front of me, there was like this mist. I don't know if it was smoke or if it was the airbag that had disintegrated. And looking out there, the lights that shone into our car were tipped. So everything felt topsy-turvy. And there was smoke or something coming out of our engine. And then there was this man, the shadow of a man, who I learned later was the driver of the other car. He had long hair and his arms were akimbo, and he ran in front of the car. I don't know where he went. And then the next thing I knew, and it might have been a few minutes, because Bruce he was in shock himself. So he wasn't necessarily trying to resuscitate me. I don't know what he was doing. But in any case, the next thing I knew, someone opened our car door, and this guy had curly hair, receding hairline, and he looked like he had just stepped out of an office. No tie, but the jacket and the open collar. And he said to me something like, I'm not going to move you because I don't know if your back is broken or whatever. I'm going to stay here. I'm going to unbuckle your belt in case your car catches on fire, and I will help you out if need be. And then he held my hand. And then the EMTs came and strapped me onto a gurney and brought us in. Later on, I found out that the man who drove into us didn't have a license, had just been in this country very briefly, was driving a car that wasn't his, wasn't even registered, had no insurance, and he hit us head on at about, maybe it had to be at least 45 miles an hour, because that was the speed limit, and that's probably what we were going. And our Volvo was literally a pile of rubble on the, I have photographs of it on the highway. So that's what happened. And then later on, when I was talking with Bruce, it took me 7 months to recover from that. My whole chest was black and blue. I had a hematoma over my heart that was the size of a football. And I had cognitive function, but everybody was kind of amazed because Bruce really felt I was out for quite a long time. I mean, when you think about not breathing that long and him not being able to find a heartbeat. Later, when I mentioned the man to Bruce, this guy holding my hand, he was pretty much like, there wasn't any man. I didn't see a man, and I thought, well, who knows? I think there was a man. I tried to check it out later, but there weren't any records of it except for an EMT coming and getting us. But that was always kind of a mysterious part to things. He was in shock, so I think there probably was a man. But anyway, that was another kind of quirky thing about that event.
And when you were in almost a different reality, I would say, for those few minutes, right? You were in this yellow pudding.
Right, whatever it was.
What were you feeling? What was, were you feeling any pain? And otherwise,
no.
What were your feelings about it?
No, and I was in excruciating pain after that. I felt as if my chest, while I was recovering those 7 months, the beginning especially, was wrapped in barbed wire. But I felt no pain, and I felt this sort of feeling that I yearn for. Like, I can't help but tear up when I think about it now, because it was such a sense of utter peace. And as I said, I'm a person that's always thinking things through and thinking the next step. And I'm not necessarily a person who's at peace very often. And it was a comforting peace. But as I said, I also did not think of myself as Deborah Prum. I just was a part of this whole thing. Now, I don't know what to make of that experience, except I'm absolutely confident that it happened. What does it mean? I don't know. There are lots of different ways to look at it. And I look at it, I felt assured. I felt reassured. One of my fears in life has always been, I'm going to die alone, or, I'll be abandoned or whatever. That sort of took the edge off that fear. Do I fear dying now? I don't think I do, but I don't know. If I were approached by, this awful person with a gun or a knife, I probably would feel fear. But in general, do I have this desperate worry about it? And I think the other thing that's changed is I don't really feel like I absolutely have to know what happens when you die. Do you go straight to heaven? Do you go to some kind of judgment, whatever? I'm kind of feel freed up from that, whether that's based on a rational reason to be freed up, I don't know. But I'm a lot less worried about or even think about those specifics.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think that's something that I've heard previously. As a matter of fact, I was speaking to somebody the other week, and he mentioned something that completely changed my way of thinking around death. Me being somebody extremely fearful of death, and not in the sense of myself dying. I probably haven't thought about that very much. I would probably fear it as well. But I think in the sense of other people and people around me.
Yes.
And somehow it was always something that I wanted to fence off from my life. So I was also giving the example, if somebody passed away in a movie, which also rarely happened in my movies because I usually only watch comedies and things that I can find uplifting. So I've never watched thrillers or movies with Bruce Willis, for instance. Nope.
Right.
But if somebody were to pass away or there would be a funeral, I would just look down, I would not want to see that, even though I knew it was an actor and they were not really that. I didn't want to trigger anything in me. And the person I spoke to last week was saying he thinks that we should, as a society and as people, think more about death in an empowering way.
Yes.
Because we think about marriage, right, our whole lives. We think about birth, we think about our children. So there's all these big milestones that we all have. But somehow death, we all sort of feel a bit cringy towards it.
Yes. Yeah, I agree with that a lot. I mean, I'm from an Italian background, and my father was very emotive when his friend's son died. He just went and sat on the couch with his friend and wept. And the son was about 18 and died somehow lifting weights and bursting. So I don't know what happened. And then when I remember, one of the most significant memories of my childhood is when my father found out by phone that his best friend died. He threw himself on the floor and just wept. And that's sort of my model for it, that you embrace that grief. And at the same time, you think about your life as a gift. One of the things that I do is I throw myself into life, and I write, but I also play music. I'm not a good musician, but I'll play with anybody that can stand it. And I know when to sit back and play softly because I might throw people off, but I paint portraits, and I just got into that maybe about 5 years ago. I was a cartoonist. I worked as a cartoonist to get through University of Connecticut and Dartmouth. I paid my way by cartooning, but I'm painting more portraits and abstract things. And I'm in improv. I'm in an improv troupe, in a theater troupe, which you have to be very involved in the immediate moment in improv. You're given a word, you create something with a group of people, and you have to concentrate on paying attention to them and jumping into the moment. And for me, that's one of the ways I've handled kind of a deep grief about different things in my life, loss of family members, and just some things that haven't worked out in my life the way I hoped, is that you accept the gift of what's in the present, even if you have tears in your eyes at the same time, and you jump forward. I also feel like, too, it helps if you notice the suffering around you. Do we have time for me to tell you a quick story about that?
Of course.
My grandchild lives in, she's 5, and she lives in Paris, and she was in the States a couple of weeks ago for Thanksgiving and was with other cousins. And I can't remember if they were playing tag or what was going on, but she was yelling, Maison Magique, Maison Magique. My French accent's horrible. And I said, what is that about? And she says, she calls me Deb because she can call me, she's not allowed to call me Debbie, but Deb they allow, is my grandmother's name. And she says, oh, that's a place in my schoolyard in Paris where you can run. And if you put your hand on the yellow drum, you can't be tagged out. It's this safe place. And I was thinking about how, later on, I was thinking about, I wish I had a yellow drum in my schoolyard that I could put my hand on to be the safe place, because so much is happening in the world. When I think about Ukraine, and I thought about what happened in Afghanistan, and I think about what's happening now in the Middle East, I can't stop weeping. And there are things in my own personal life that, there are relationships that just won't get themselves reconciled. And, wouldn't it be nice to have a safe place? And I have been thinking about that. And I think part of what occurs to me is I'm always shocked at suffering, but, the Buddhists say there's suffering. The Christians in the Bible say there's going to be suffering. And what I need to do, have been thinking is, and what I try to do is not think about suffering in a global way of things I can't help. For example, when a group of people from Afghanistan came to Charlottesville, a bunch of us organized around a particular family, 3 or 4 people organized of my friends, a particular family, and helped them. And now a couple of years later, they have jobs, they have a home to live in, they're saving to buy a house. A couple of them have gotten certifications in particular fields. There's suffering around you all the time. And one of the ways to reduce the angst in your life about the global suffering is to figure out what's in your own backyard and help out with it. And that helps too when you're going through a terrible time personally, to reach out and help someone else around you, because you are surrounded, if you open your eyes, to people that are hurting.
Absolutely. I couldn't agree more. And I think especially perhaps just to me, because I'm not that familiar with Charlottesville or Virginia, but it always sounded like a very traditional place.
Mm-hmm.
So as opposed to, the big cities in the US, where you have New York, you'll have LA, which are so popular, and I can imagine full of tourists, full of people from abroad. But I could imagine places like Virginia, you wouldn't have these many foreigners, right? So that must be quite interesting, especially when somebody is coming out of a conflict area.
Yeah.
So you already have some emotion attached to their home countries.
They were so traumatized. The particular family we worked with, 2 of them had worked, the husband and wife had worked for the American government there, and they had run to the airport that fateful day, and the woman had forgotten her passport. And then my friend, I'm not going to say any of their names because their relatives are still there. My closest friend of the 3 was just like 20 years old at the time. And her sister called and said, can you bring my passport to me at the airport? Which was huge, because there, if you got into a cab and you were a woman and you got into a cab alone, you were risking your life. So she did that. But the cab driver threatened her that he was going to bring her to the Taliban, took her money, and let her out. So she was at the airport on the tarmac with her sister, giving her sister the passport, but she had nothing. She had no money, no way to get back, nothing. And fortunately, she got scooped up with everybody else and wound up here. But she had said goodbye to her mother, thinking she'd be right back, and goodbye to her life when she was in school there, and wound up here with nothing, with literally the clothes on her back. So they were traumatized every which way possible. And when you reach out to people who've been through that, and you can actually physically give them help, socks, a computer, connecting with someone who can train them in English, whatever, it alleviates the feeling that you're not in control. I mean, we aren't in control, but you think about yourself less and reach out in a way that's loving and kind, and get blessed so much more. I mean, I would say that Afghan family has blessed me so much more than the help that I gave them with a group of people, not just me, a group of people helping them. And I think that's the way to cope with your own grief and your despair about everything in the world. In fact, Wendell Berry says this thing. He says, be joyful though you've considered all the facts. Like, be joyful despite the fact that the world is on fire.
Absolutely. And those are really wise words. And I know one of my neighbors, I'll add his words in as well. One of my neighbors, he always says, because I come from a culture where you always tend to look at who has more than you, and who is more successful. And maybe most Western cultures tend to glorify this success and having. And he'll always say, there's many more people that have less than we do, and there's fewer people that have more than what we do. So just be grateful for what you have.
Yeah, I'd like to just comment on that quickly, if you would let me.
Sure.
I listened recently to a conversation between Arthur Brooks, who is a social scientist at Harvard, and his specialty is happiness, and Tara Brach, who is a Buddhist. And he says that we need to be careful that we have wants, and if it's a fraction, haves underneath, and that we don't make our wants so huge. We don't need half the stuff we think we need to be happy. And a lot of people in America call something their bucket list, like, I need to go to Europe before I die, or I won't be happy, or I need to have a new house, or whatever. And he said to be satisfied and enjoy what you have, and don't constantly be dragged around by what you think you need, because it can be an idol, it can be a trap. And they suggest, in America, people always talk about a bucket list, things you have to do to be happy, get to do before you die. And he says, have an unbucket list, a list of things that you just don't make your happiness contingent on. There are certain things in my life. My children live in usually in 3 different time zones, and sometimes on 3 different continents. And I grew up in that tenement with all of my family around me. And it is really hard for me. Like, for example, on Christmas, we won't have anybody with us. That week, kids will come in, but the paradigm is so different from what I grew up with. And I realized I can make myself completely miserable thinking about that, or I can enjoy painting, playing music, doing improv. So anyway, the unbucket list is something I try to keep in mind, of what I can let go of and not make my happiness be contingent on it.
I think that's a good takeaway for anybody who's listening. Definitely something to keep in mind. I wanted to segue back to the NDE and to the life that followed.
Yes.
I also wanted to say, because I think a lot of times people are taken aback or very impressed by the NDE itself and by the story. And usually we don't appreciate, the amount of recovery that it takes, because it sounds like your health was affected the first and the second time quite a lot. So just getting back to good health was a journey each time. I also wanted to ask, how did you go through that recovery process? And perhaps after that, if you could comment on, if you were to have the possibility to take it all back, and to not having been through those experiences and not having felt the feelings you felt, what would you do?
It's funny you should ask that question, because I think about suffering a lot in my life. And I think about, say, that Bible verse about what suffering builds in you. And I am not a person that wants to suffer. I hate it. I spent 7 months in physical therapy after that second accident, because I had the hematoma in my chest, which was really dangerous. They didn't know what to do about it. It was a massive bunch of blood. And I had to, I'm more of a rescuer person. I go and help people. I really had to kind of be calm, be on the couch, be contemplative. And friends came and helped me. And it was a humbling experience, but it also taught me about how to help other people, not in an all-knowing way and deliver the meal and run out the door or whatever, but to actually listen to what they say. If they say, I don't want a meal, I don't need a meal, I need someone to pick up groceries or whatever, to be more attentive. So even as hard as those things were and how much it makes me cry when I talk about it now, I don't think I would change those things because they made me into a different person. Even now, I just don't take anything for granted. I mean, you could say I'm, what's the word? Not more morbid. But I feel I'm the opposite of morbid. Like if I get a chance to get in my kayak and go to the river and look out for herons mating, I do it. I just don't put things off. Or a bigger thing, if I feel like I've offended somebody or if I feel like a relationship's not right, I pretty much don't rest until I write it. And you can't write all relationships. I mean, that's the tragic thing about our life on earth. The earth is broken, people are broken, I'm broken. But those events have taught so much to me. Would I have liked to have that child live, that pregnancy come to fruition? Oh yeah. Would I like to maybe not have some of the stuff that I continue to have as a result of both the pregnancy and the accident? Yes, but I can't deny the value that both events brought to my life. So that's the answer to that.
Yeah. No, I think that's definitely very well put, very wise.
Yeah.
Just taking it all in. I think oftentimes I go through these interviews and it's just so many notes to self that I need to make, because there's things that I know that will be useful to always keep in mind when tough times happen.
Yeah.
I also wanted to get a bit into religion, because you mentioned being raised Christian. What was your relationship with religion? How did you think of? Did you think God had any play in you surviving that first pregnancy and definitely your child being okay at the end of it? And did you think there was any divine intervention the second time? And I think also, just to put all my questions out there so you can then address them, has your relationship with religion and with God changed at all before the near-death experiences and afterwards?
Wow, that's a lot. I was raised in we're one of the few Protestant Italians that came over from Italy, and I was raised in a very small religion that I respect. My grandfather on one side and great grandfather on the other side, I think, helped start it. It was a little rigid, and I rejected it when I went to college. In some ways, some of the tenets of it, I still have great affection for the people and for how it set me up in life. When I went to college, I wound up actually having a pretty amazing experience of rethinking the whole thing and dedicating my life to God, getting baptized, but not really attending any churches regularly, just having a relationship of listening and looking for guidance in scripture. And then after I got married, my husband and I attended a church which was probably definitely a lot more conservative than I would have probably attended on my own. I was always an outlier there. What I can say is that I've had several health issues that did not look good many times in my life, including the 2 near-death experiences. And I do feel that God is in charge of my first day on earth and my last day on earth. And I do feel that for some reason, I've been allowed to continue to live. And I appreciate that. And I look for meaning in it. Like I feel like one of the ways I can handle grief and suffering on earth is by asking what's my meaning on earth. And I know you had that in a question that I looked at from before. And what is my purpose on earth? And I feel like the micro purpose for me, I mean, there's a global purpose for people who call themselves Christians. And I want to make sure people understand I'm a Christian that I'm not judgmental of other people, and I'm not politically aligned with a lot of the people who are united about, with a particular party in America. I'm not that with that group of people. In any case, I've spent a lot of time thinking about my meaning and significance on earth. And I feel like, and I don't want to sound pretentious or like I'm bragging or anything, because it's just what I feel that I'm put on earth to do. And one is to connect people. I have a background being around all different kinds of people growing up for the first 14 years of my life. And I feel like I want to connect people who are of different faiths, like people who are Muslim and Buddhist and Christian, with people who are agnostics and atheists, but people of all different ethnicities too. Like my life has been really dedicated to bringing people together in book groups or critique groups or jam groups, playing music, or being in my improv group where everybody is from somewhere else and, different from each other. That's one thing I feel like I'm put on earth to do. And the other thing is, I feel like God has given me a gift. And I'm not saying the gift is accompanied by talent, because I'm sure sometimes God's up there saying, oh, I didn't tell you to do that, or really? But I think he's given me a gift of creativity and drive to create things, whether it's in writing or in painting or in improv or in music or even photography when I'm out in nature. And those things give me a sense of meaning despite all that's going on, and significance, mostly because I believe God values me. So it's not a bunch of rules. I've gotten so much looser about worrying about what everybody should do and everybody should think. It's more of a relationship, so that I don't feel worried about somebody trying to convince me that God exists or God doesn't exist, because I have a relationship. I know God exists. Sometimes my relationship is a wrestling match. Like, I think I identify with Jacob the most in the Bible, who, if I'm remembering correctly, just spent his life wrestling with God and just saying, why this, why that, So anyway, long answer to those questions.
No, but definitely worth the stories. And I think it's also good that we address these things, because, to be honest, I think a lot of us go through different phases of our relationship with religion. I don't think it's black or white. And I think that's definitely something that can be more acknowledged. And again, I also think that just because we come from different countries or different backgrounds or different religious beliefs, it doesn't mean that we can't find common ground. So definitely a good message to put out there. What I also wanted to address, and I think it really fits in with what we are talking about, is life happening to us, or is it like happening for us? What do you think?
I read that you sent that question ahead of time, and I read it. I don't know. And the thing that I have this interest in physics, and I read a lot of physics, and I frequently read physics before I go to bed, which my husband hates, because I'll go, do you know that scientists think that all time happens at once? And do you know this or that? And there is that theory that all time happens at once. And does life happen to us or not? I do believe God exists, and I believe that God is both mother and father God. I do believe that God loves me. Are my days ordained? Like, does God know what's happening? Well, if God is omniscient, God knows what's happening. Does that mean I am heading in a certain direction because of that? I don't feel that way. I don't think that's true. I'm not really a Calvinist. Do I feel that God God loves me. Yes, God has a positive influence in my life, that God opens doors for me. I do. And then sometimes those same doors are closed. Like, I call it the miracle of the parking space. All right. I pray for parking spaces. I learned how to drive late in life. And one time I was trying to deliver a bunch of food to a friend who had cancer, who was in the hospital. And there was no close parking anywhere because I can't parallel park, whatever. And I was in the garage going around and around and around, and the parking space opened next to the elevator, next to the hall where she was. Now, did God do that? I don't know. But I have enough of those things in my life that I feel like sometimes God just reaches down and does something like that. Is that theologically correct? I have no idea. There are other times in my life I say, why was that guy driving straight at our headlights at 45 miles an hour? So is this theologically sound? Probably not. But I do feel like there is a God who knows my beginning and my end, and who relates to me in a loving manner, in a way that's beyond my understanding of love. Because there are some things that I think of like, oh my gosh, why is this happening to me? So that's my answer. I wish it were more black and white, but it's not. I'm sorry.
No, it is what it is. So now I think it's always a question that I like to ask everybody, and this is mostly because I think it's just a frame of reference that you have.
Mm-hmm.
Um, and I think it's just an interesting exercise for anybody to do. Like, do I think I'm just in the passenger seat of my life, or do I think, this is happening for me to thrive? Like, every challenge is an opportunity for me to learn.
Oh,
And
is that
for
what
me
you
to
mean by that? Yeah. Oh,
yeah.
definitely I'm not in the passenger seat of my life. I feel like I have choices. In fact, I feel that every minute of my life, I have the choice to lean toward the light and to keep leaning, like not to be angry at someone who's like driving crazy in front of me or whatever. I have the chance to lean toward the light, or I have the chance to operate in a way that makes me sad because it's not what I know I should be doing. And when I say should, I mean should for my benefit, for the world's benefit, and for obedience to sort of these guidelines like love your neighbor that are in the Bible. So if that's what you mean, then that's a clear answer, that I do feel I'm in the driver's seat and I bear the consequences of my actions, either that head toward the light or don't head toward the light. And that also is it's a wrestling match for me to always try to head toward the light.
Absolutely. I also wanted to take a second to discuss your NDEs, your near death experiences. Definitely something that happens to a handful of people, not too many, and definitely something that maybe a lot of people cannot understand or see for what they are. And you've mentioned your your only two near death experiences. You've told your husband, but you didn't really want to share it with anybody else. And I can also imagine going through those health conditions, focusing on getting better is probably also not top of your mind to share it with the world. But then later on, you decided to write a piece detailing your near death experiences and how you look at it. Um, so, could you tell me a bit about why you chose to not share to anybody but your husband initially? Why you then decided to share it with the world? And also, what was the feedback that you received from the whole world, but also from your friends and family who maybe just found out when you wrote the piece?
Okay, I'll try to keep all those questions in mind. And if I miss something, you can tell me. I had the two experiences. I didn't put them together at all until a friend of mine a couple years ago handed me a book that was written by a professor at UVA I think his name is Bruce Gray, and then I think the other guy's named James Tucker, on near-death experiences. And I read the book and I thought, holy cow, in this book, there are near-death experiences, and my two experiences fit into the two most major classes of them. And I thought, that's what they were, near-death experiences. I mean, I didn't put those terms on it. So there was that. And then I thought, wow, do I want to talk with them, talk with anybody about them? It was reassuring that I, just hadn't lost my mind. And I thought, well, do I want to be a person that has had a near-death experience? I mean, you kind of, if you were me, I'm a pragmatist, and if I heard somebody saying that before I had it myself, I would just think, well, maybe who knows what, and then the next thing that happened, I belong to a critique group, belonged to it for about 20 years, and people come and go, and we write and critique each other's stuff and then send it out. Pretty much everybody in the group is published novels or books or whatever. And I thought, I'm just going to write something for them. And because it's a group of people that are kind and affirming, but also brutally honest about stuff, because that's what you want. So I ran it by them, and their reaction was, some of it was technical, and this is how you could say this better, but the rest of it was interesting, and that we're sorry you went through those experiences. Those seemed really difficult. And some of them said, oh, I can relate to that, but no one had something like that. So then I tentatively thought, well, I want to send it around. I don't want people, it's a vulnerable thing to send it around, but also it's a vulnerable area for other people. I don't want people to get some kind of false hope that this is, some sort of theological thing they can hold on to. But I decided to just send a couple of queries out, and Huffington Post came back like within an hour that they were interested. And then I was as much push as pull. After I signed the contract with them, I'm like, oh, what did I do? But the result has been interesting. I've had lots of, as I said before to you, I think before the interview, lots of people reaching out to me. But they were conversations I didn't want to have. I already knew they were going to sensationalize it just by how they framed their questions. And I did give an interview to somebody in Ireland and to you, and I may in the future, but I wanted to present the information as this was my experience. And I haven't had anybody except one person in Ireland on the radio show. I guess they had comments, and the person said, you should tell Deborah Prum to stop taking drugs. It sounds like a hallucination to me. And I thought it was pretty funny. I mean, whatever. I wasn't taking any drugs, but on the whole, people have responded with more curiosity or empathy, but not ridicule. In my family, it is really weird. They have not really said much about it at all. And one of the reasons initially that I didn't talk about it is because I had so many health issues. I didn't mention, I had meningitis, I had pneumonia that threw me in the hospital. Then I had a case of septicemia that I almost didn't escape. So I felt like I just didn't want to wear them out with this. And I'm not sure even if they read the article or not. I told them about it. So they had very little reaction. And Bruce also just said, yeah, that's what we went through. He's a very matter-of-fact person. I'm emotional. I'm all over the place. He is just sort of, well, you survived that. Well, you survived that. So in terms of family, it was a kind of a flat reaction, but friends, mostly warm and interesting. And then the general public, the usual set of people that will approach you with really odd experiences or really odd questions. And I respond to those people, but don't really continue the conversation because I'm not sure I have anything to add to it.
Absolutely. And I think that's a very valid way to put it. I think there's always judgment out there, but also I do believe, and one of my strongest opinions is we do not have to have an opinion on everything in life.
Right.
So,
Right.
Things like this, it can just be your story, and it's really not up to anybody else to validate it or to think something of it. And it seems like, especially nowadays with social media, we tend to think something about everything.
Right. And
You
the
don't
details have
always.
persevered. I've kept a journal, and it's just exactly the same details. So it's not like I'm adding or subtracting or making anything up. It's just it is what happened to me when I experienced this happening to me, and you can take it or leave it. I'm not trying to sell anything. So
Exactly. I also wanted to take a bit of time to discuss your career as a writer.
oh
So
yes,
it sounds like you were mentioning earlier you were pre-med, so it doesn't seem like you were going to be a writer early on in life. And then you sort of, even though I read that you were writing as a child, so you were
yes,
sort of enjoying it.
I loved it.
Would you tell me a bit about how you almost fell into this career as a writer?
Well, the funny thing is, because I worked my way through school. My parents helped me as much as they could. And I just felt like I really had had to pick a profession that I could make money and help people, but also have something that was more certain than any of the arts that I was interested in. But I always had an English course, and it was like dessert for me. I would write stories in college, and I loved it. But I also loved the creative aspect of helping people in health. And I was hired by Dartmouth Med School to figure out why so many kids were dying in a state as small as New Hampshire. New Hampshire had 1 million people then, and they had really high death rate. So I love the creativity of that too. But when Bruce got a job as a doctor after 13 years of training, I thought I was here with 3 little kids. I would write, because I always have had that urge. I love creating a world and be able to move the people in the world and have outcomes that I love. And most of my fiction is pretty grim. It's about suicide and loss and difficulty and domestic abuse. But there's a redemptive core, like this little tremulous splinter of light that is hope at the end. And I try to do it without wrapping it up, without, preaching. And then my essays are different. You're right. Frequently they start out with some kind of true incident that has happened to me or somebody else. And at the end, kind of, once again, a redemptive look at why that might have worked out for the best. And if it didn't, why that still isn't so bad. So I love the creative aspect of writing. In fact, I can hardly get through any day of my life without creating something, either a painting or just even a little bit of writing or whatever. I love bringing into existence something that didn't exist before. There was a mystery writer named Dorothy Sayers, and she was a very famous British writer. She wrote all these different mysteries, but she also wrote this book called The Mind of the Maker. And she had this theory that God is the creator of everything, and that God had like this celestial vault. In fact, I wrote about it somewhere, where all creations existed, and creative people just needed to reach into that vault and find that creation and pull it down into the lives, whether it's a painting or a piece of writing. And I love that. Whether or not it's true, who knows? But it makes me less anxious about anything. If I have a beginning this year and the ending of a story next year, I just wait for it to arrive. And sometimes you need to have more maturity in your life or more events in your life to bring a story together, either an essay or fiction. But it just brings me alive to write. And I love bringing my writing to people. And sometimes I think it makes a difference in their life. I've gotten lots of feedback over the years for the things I've written about, gosh, this struck me. And usually it's the thing that I didn't even think about in whatever it is I wrote. So anyway, long answer to a short question.
That's the beautiful thing about writing and about books, I think, is that everyone sees in them what they need to see.
Yes, yeah.
So I don't think every 2 readers see the same thing or understand the same thing, but that's exactly what makes the great books great.
Yeah. In fact, someone will say something and I'll go, did I put that in there? I don't really remember that. And sometimes it's how they extrapolate, something beyond. But yeah, you're right. I mean, I find that myself. I love reading good literature, and I'm in a book club and hearing other people's perspectives, think what they got out of that. And as a writer, that makes me think, wow, it's like a diamond with a bunch of facets, and people see one of the facets, and others people see another. And it's the neat thing about any kind of creation, any kind of painting or writing or even improv. People will get different things out of a scene, and it's lovely.
Absolutely. Deborah, how can people connect with you and with your work? How can they find your books?
Well, the easiest thing to do is just to go to my website, which is, www, and then it's Deborah Prum. And then my blog is there. That's one of the best things to go to, because it'll direct you to a podcast. I have a podcast myself that I just launched. So I have 3 followers right now. Myself, my husband, and my son, who I forced to follow me. So that's just
I'll be number 4.
Great, that'll be good. So that's the way to find me. If you just Google my name, the search engine will come up right away, usually with my website, and then you can explore it. The paintings are there, and the fiction and the nonfiction. So
perfect. We'll add all the links in the descriptions or the show notes below.
Thank you.
Deborah, thank you so much. It's a conversation that I could have easily had for a couple more hours. I think your story is just so beautiful, but it's also so real, and there's just so much, I think, overall that we can learn from it. And when I say we, I mean the whole audience, but I've definitely been taking notes of things that I can actually apply to my life. Based on what you've shared. So you're an inspiration. You're an amazing author. And I think your story is definitely out there to empower other people.
Well, I thank you so much. And I have to say, you came up with about the best interview questions I've ever had. And I've thoroughly enjoyed getting to know you. And I really appreciate this opportunity. Thank you.
Thank you so much. I'm going to end the recording now.
I was abducted from inside of my home on my 31st birthday. And now this did not occur in Canada, which is where I live. This occurred in my home country, my birth country in the Caribbean. And I was taken and held hostage for 2 weeks, held for ransom. At the time, my kids were very young, 8 and 6 respectively, and they were severely traumatized. My husband was severely traumatized by all of this. And in a matter of seconds, these men just came in, gun, machete, and you just kind of, before you can even think, you freeze. And that might have been a mistake, but what are you going to do? A gun is to your head. And from the get-go, it was all very rough and brutal. Their attitude, their language, they started kicking me around from the get-go. But also from the get-go, meaning the second that gun was like here, there was only one thing and one name in my mind, and that was Jesus. My faith had always, I don't want to say religion, because I don't believe in religion. I believe in relationship. And I had a pretty okay relationship with Jesus, but I had not fully realized the depth to which it really should go until after the fact. But I knew what I knew, which was the one person who would never leave me would be him. And I just kept saying his name and praying that my kids would not return home at that point in time when these men were there. And so said, so done, thank goodness. In any event, they held me hostage for 2 weeks, 14 days, 14 nights. And during that time, I was really, really brutalized. I mean, these were like tall, strong, muscular, buff men in excess of 6 feet, and I'm barely 5 feet. Steel-tip boots. They were always carrying a weapon. I was kicked about, thrown about, slapped, cuffed, choked. I was starved until, of course, they realized, well, hey, a hostage is of no use unless she's alive. So then came, well, let's try to get her to eat something or ingest anything, water, whatever. I couldn't. I mean, who under those circumstances are going to be able to have a meal? have anything stay down. And I was throwing up, constantly. I went into shock 3 times. I remember the first stopover, as I put it, was a dumping hole in the ground. Old appliances, garbage, that kind of thing. And they just threw me in the hole. And Sabrina, I mean, threw me in the hole. So I'm blindfolded, everything. I have no idea what's coming. So my body was very well banged up, handcuffed, tie-strapped, chained, all of you name it. It was done. And then I was taken to the first holding point, which was where negotiations actually began with my husband on this insane ransom that we most certainly did not have lying around. That's where I was sexually assaulted the first time in a very brutal manner, because my husband told one of the kidnappers, well, hey, I don't have that money. We don't have that money. And because that was his response, I was the scapegoat. It was vented on me, and it was horrific. It was very, very numbing. Not even traumatic. It was numbing. Then I was moved to the final shack, would refer to it, that's where I spent the remainder of my days, under the watch of this one guy that I referred to as the keeper. His sole responsibility was, okay, keep her alive so we can exchange. And that man, he was a beast. He was a beast. I was strung up. I was suspended from the air. As soon as I was dropped off, he just, he had me in a chokehold, and he was like, you make us now, and I snap your leg. I'll snap your neck, which I'm pretty sure he could have done given his size and my size. And he suspended me from the air, hanging from some chains, and he was trying to get information from me. What were you earning? What are your savings? Blah blah blah. I'm not thinking straight. I was just assaulted. I was beaten to a pulp. Like there was no processing anything. And but he continued nevertheless until I passed out. And then he realized I passed out so many times, it's not funny. Eventually, he dragged me inside, handcuffed me to a small bedpost, and that's where I remained on that little mattress for 13 days and 13 nights. And I was assaulted 2 more times by this man. The second time was because he saw me shivering, which it was around Christmas time, so it was chilly. It was early morning, and he asked, what's your deal? And I said, I'm cold. Because I said I was cold, that was his license to assault me. And the third time, he thought I was messing with the mask, because I saw no light for 14 days, 14 nights. So I was trying to widen the holes at my nostrils so I can actually breathe a little bit better. And he was very, very enraged. So that was again his excuse to very, very brutally assault me. And through this all, I'm fighting as hard as I could. I'm screaming at the top of my lungs. I don't know, how you measure strength, but against this, I refer to him as a beast of a man. How do you fight someone that large and that powerful, right? And his hands, one hand would go all the way around my throat and choke me till I'm unconscious. And that kind of trauma I'm talking about. He left me bleeding. I didn't know what was injured, what was left inside of me. I don't even know. And I survived on dry crackers, which, I would nibble tiny pieces, very, very small amounts of water just to kind of keep me barely alive, because I didn't know where these things were coming from, right? But at the same time, I knew that I had to get back to my babies. I just had to survive somehow. My kids needed me. And all the while, I was questioning God. Oh, so this is what I get in return for living my life the right way, not having any boyfriends, not going to parties or drinking or smoking or anything, marrying my first boyfriend, working myself to death to take care of my 2 kids, my husband, my home, my parents, what did I do to deserve this? So I started really lashing out at God. Like, I mean, okay, you want to punish someone? Okay, right. This? Like, in this way? Really? I could not wrap my head around why such an extreme. And I mean, in hindsight, I understand. In hindsight, I do. At the time, I didn't. I questioned him. And it's important to note that I never stopped loving Jesus, never stopped loving God. I was just mad. I was just trying to understand where that I literally went through every moment of my life in my mind, and was like, okay, so yes, I did disobey this time because I said I was going for ice cream at this place, but I didn't go there. I went there. So could this be why? And I'm trying to find all of the reasons to justify this horrible situation. And at the end of it, I was so exhausted. I mean, like mentally, emotionally, I was already battered beyond belief, but I was just exhausted. And that's when I did what I had needed to do from the very beginning, which was say, okay, I give up. I cannot figure this out. So you know what? If this is the way you want me to die, because at the time I was terrified. I was positive they were going to kill me. It was just a matter of, okay, how? And I was just praying like, okay, just let it be like really quick. Please don't let them like torture me even more. And I was, all of these scenarios are going through my head. And I'm like, okay, Lord, if no matter which way they kill me, however you deem fit, if this is what you want, fine. It's not like I have any control over the situation. I couldn't leave. I had no idea what was going on with my kids or my parents or my mom, my husband, nobody. I was just lost to the world, essentially. And with no control, I had to give it over. And I had no choice. I was like, okay, you do whatever you please. And I didn't say it with malice or sarcasm. I just honestly said, just deal with it because I can't. And he did. But what he did was the next day, the man who I described was a beast. He was a lamb. He was a puppy in comparison. And I always refer to him as like Daniel in the lion, to myself as Daniel in the lion's den. And like the Lord shut the lion's mouth, and they had to kneel and bow before me, and which eventually did. He just began protecting me. He was like bringing home cooked meals. I mean, I don't know from where, but home cooked like hot meals, and like, okay, but what do you want to eat today? What do you feel like eating? I'll go get whatever it is. What do you want to, do you need medicine? Do you need, whatever? He's just so attentive. And in my mind, I'm thinking, he's just trying to keep me alive, But really, the Lord had started change in his heart that not even he was aware of. And that continued for a few days. And I had not known at the time, but he was listening to me when I would be praying. Whenever I thought I was alone, I'd be whispering my prayers, and he would be hearing me. And so he started, well, what are you praying to this Jesus guy for? Like who's that? I said, what do you mean, who's that? Like, how many people do you meet who really don't know about Jesus? Very, very few, right? And I'm like, so you've never like heard? He said, yeah, I've heard of him, but I don't know anything about him. And that blew my mind. And it suddenly, and again, from this point on, it was all divine. It was like the Lord was opening my eyes, the other side of this world that I was not exposed to, the dark side. And the Lord was opening his eyes to my side of the world, in which the way I grew up, where it was the lighter side, the good side. And he brought these two worlds together for the reason ended up being for his transformation. And we talked, and I explained, and the best that I could, I taught him everything I knew about Jesus. And he was like, but why do you love him? Look at your condition. You are not in good shape. You probably won't even survive the week. How can you love this Jesus person, right? You can't see him. You've never seen him. Have you seen him? And I was like, well, no, just pictures or images. He's like, and that's good enough for you to love him that much? Yeah. Which he could not could not comprehend. Eventually, though, with sufficient my intention was not to teach him to have mercy on me or anything. It was just all divine. It was just the Lord saying, teach this man. And he did. I remember he got to the point where he realized that he had really, really severely wronged me. And he dropped to his knees, literally, in front of me, held my hands and cried and begged for forgiveness for what he had done. I forgave him. I really, truly did. Now, there's a lot of ambiguity around that word called forgiveness. And what is it really? And how do you even get there? Which is, that's a whole other lesson that I teach, clients who approach me. But I really honestly did. And he was like, why would you forgive me? And my response, again, this is all the Lord through me. I'm just a vessel. And the Lord's response to him was, because I did not send my son into the world to point fingers and condemn. I sent him to save and to love. And he started to absorb even more, like this God of love can love me? And I said, yes. But why? I'm a murderer. And he confessed. He said, hey, I've killed, and he started telling me in what manner it transpired and all that. And it was meant to scare me, but for whatever reason it didn't. And I said, even though you're a murderer, there's always forgiveness. That's why the Lord came, to forgive and bring healing and bring comfort and bring hope. And he couldn't digest it. He left, he came back. He kept doing that, leaving and coming back when he couldn't accept that he was worthy of forgiveness, worthy of any kind of love. And the second time he came back, he asked if he can refer to me as his friend. And I was like, well, why? And he said, well, I grew up with people who were gang members and work associates and whatever in their criminal activity, but there was nobody who ever took the time to listen to me and hear my side of the story. Nobody cared enough. You're the first human being who cared enough to listen to me. And so I said, yes, you can call me your friend. And he was weeping again. He was like, you're my friend. And I will protect you. No one will touch you. No one will kill you. You will get home to your babies very soon. And I will make sure of it. And if they come for you, they will have to kill him first. So he then became my protector. At the end of it, I wear a scapula. I always have. It's always been around. It's just really a string with holding two plastic images, right? But it meant the value of this to me was, incredible. And they had taken all my jewelry, everything like that. And he had often looked at it, and he asked me very politely, may I have that thing around your neck? I was like, why? And he said, because every time I look at it, I'm going to remember you, my friend, and that there's always time to change. And he refused to take it off of my neck. He insisted that I remove it and give it to him, which I did. And they cried again. Sometime later, body was just so battered. It felt like I was drifting off into a sleep. That's what it felt like, dying. Like I was just slowly drifting, and I'd wake up a little bit and then drift off. I was very soothing, but as I drifted, all of the pain started going away, And initially I'm thinking, well, I'm falling asleep. But no, I was dying. And in the blink of an eye, literally, I'm above my body, looking down at me and the room and the contents of the room and everything. And I'm like, but what the hell? How could I be here and how could I be there? And I remember going down and looking at my chest, and there's no movement, there's no breathing. And my body was very, very limp. I was like, what? Am I dead? And before I could even process the thought, well, am I dead, really? There is this magnificent white light on my left. Now, people seem to think that death is so horrible and so scary. It is the most beautiful experience you will ever have. And I know this sounds kind of twisted, but I can't wait to die again. Because I can't wait to go back home. I'm biding my time here. Literally, I'm just biding my time. And you don't stop being you. I was me. I was all Debbie. I was, the memories, I knew exactly what happened that put me in that position. I remembered my parents everywhere I remembered everything. I was still me. And out of that white light that I could look at without squinting, it's the sun pales in comparison to that light. Jesus steps out, and I know it's him, but my love for him is so much, and my humility is so much that I dared not look at him. I dropped to the ground, and at his feet, I remember looking at his toes and thinking, oh, he's wearing sandals, like it's portrayed in the movies and all that. But he wasn't. He was bare feet. Hence the name of my book, Bare Feet. Because when I was abducted, I was also bare feet. And I'm looking at the light that's emanating from his toes. And I'm thinking, I said, but that's not a sandal. That's his toe. His actual toe. And this is what I'm thinking, And I'm like, oh my gosh, I'm right near Jesus' toe. And it was such a thrill just to be that close to his toe. And I kid you not, even now, if the Lord were to take me now, I would be so happy right there. I don't need the crown and the mansions they talk about in the streets of, I don't need any. You give me him right by his toe, and I would stay there for all eternity and admire and just bask in that glow. And not even touch his toe, But he lifted me, he cradled me up like a baby as an adult, but as he held me like a baby. And that in itself is a teaching as to just how wide, oceanic his love is, that we as adults can fit into his embrace, and he said, it's okay, you can rest now, you're exhausted, just rest. And I snuggled. And if, for those of you out there who think, and I know the best place in the world is on your mom. It's always on your mom's shoulder, your mom's lap, your mom's belly, your mom's butt. I know the kids, they just, that's home, right? If you think that is comfort, oh, imagine being in his arms. And I snuggled on his chest and I slept. Beautiful sleep. That was an actual sleep. When I opened my eyes, I was on the beaches of heaven. I've tried, but I have not found the blues of that ocean, or the greens of the trees, and the colors of the rocks and the sand, and there's just no comparison. So I refer to it as this life, the earth on which we live. This is black and white. Heaven is living color. It's like the color itself is alive. The rock is a rock, but it's alive with the light of God. It's the best way I can explain it. It's just everything is alive, but not necessarily moving. It's just alive, rich. And I was like a toddler over his shoulder, like this, and I'm looking back and I'm, wow. And the beach had always been has always been one of my favorite places. I mean, I grew up on an island, right? But I always loved the sound of water and the sand, and and it's so gorgeous. And now everything after this was telepathic. And it was not that I could not have spoken or that Jesus couldn't speak. There was just no need to. There's no need to. I looked over and I said, but he's walking and I'm not seeing any footprints. And I'm like, the footprints. And he knew what I was thinking. And his response was, because you're not supposed to go back. And I tried, Sabrina. I tried so hard to be sad. Just the thought of not going back to my kids. I tried to be sad. I could not be sad. It's impossible to feel sadness or regret or resentment or anger, or it's impossible to feel those emotions in his presence. It's just it's an absolute. It cannot happen. That's the power of Christ. And he put me down on the sand, and just like a little baby, you swore I'd never been on a beach. and I'm digging my toes in the sand. And wet sand, when you mess with it, it's pretty clumpy, right? But this sand was moist, it was wet, but when I dug my toes in, you would have sworn it was dry sand. Every crystal was just lifted up. And that's exactly what the grains of sand were, crystals. And I stooped down, I was like, wow. And I'm holding it up to the light, and I'm like, this is an actual like crystal. And I could have spent all of eternity looking at every single grain of crystal on that beach, and everyone was different in a different, magnificent way. But before I knew what was happening, I observed as Jesus walked, he'd take a few steps, the waves in the water, which were not rough, by the way, were just more like a very, very gentle ripple. Everything in the water stopped. The life, the aquatic creatures, everything stopped motion. The water, so in the same way there was a straight line on the horizon, as he walked, the water itself stopped in his presence. And he'd continue walking, and then it would move again. And then wherever he walked, it would stop again. And I was just in awe. It was just like everything was paying homage and honor and respect to the King of Kings. It was just awesome. And it suddenly occurred to me, but where's the sun? It kind of looks like a sky, but it's not a sky because there are no clouds. There's like nothing. And I'm looking around, trying to find stuff that we're used to. Jesus said, he said, there's no need for a sun. So in my mind, I'm thinking, but the light, there's light to like, it didn't compute, right? And he was like, the light you see is the light of God, which shines on everything. And then I really looked and I realized that like the trees, the leaves on the trees, there were no shadows underneath the leaves. There was no shadow on either side, any side of the rocks or stones or whatever was there. Because the light of God covers and envelops, and it's just absorbed by everything. So there are no shadows. And I'm thinking, and he said the sky. Why do we need a sky? Here you're limitless. You're limitless in your movement. You're limitless in what you can do, who you can become, where you can go. There are no limits. There's no sky. There's no need for it. And the breeze, the gentle breeze that I thought was, sea breeze, I said, no, that's the breath of God. The breath of God that upon which everything thrives in heaven. And it was all so mind-blowing to me. And we walked, and he knew I was thinking about my kids. Now, mind you, I was thinking about my kids. Like you would think, oh, there's a bottle of water. A statement. Not, oh, I wish I had my water right now. There was nothing like that. And he said, he looked at me. That's when he stopped walking. He turned around and he looked at me and he said, you worry for your kids, or you're thinking of your kids, but do you not trust me to take care of them? And I thought for a second, and I realized, who am I to question him? He is the only one who loves my children more than me. And I said, yes, Lord, I trust you. And I literally let go of my kids. I'd never known that I was capable of doing something like, how do you let go of your children? Like entirely. And feel comfortable knowing that they're in good hands. With the way of this world, how do you can't even imagine sending them off to the mall without all of the dangers that exist. And there I was, letting go of my two children who I love more than life to the Lord. And I knew they would be okay. And as soon as I let go, this was the second time he was teaching me this lesson, I gave it up and I let go. God himself gave them back to me. When I gave Jesus that answer, we took 2 steps, and then there was a more brilliant light, which I didn't even think was like possible. But out of that light was a voice. There was no image of an individual in it. It was just a voice, and I will never, ever forget it. He still speaks to me in that voice. And he says, Debbie, you would like to return to your children. And I'm like, yes, I would like to. But again, I'm saying that with no sadness or regret or anything. And he says, I will allow you to return, but you must promise to finish my work on earth. And he gives me this agenda. I refer to it as an agenda. He's like, boom, 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 boom. These are the things you're supposed to do. And at the top of the list is this book. He holds up this book, and I see the cover, the design on the cover. I see the name Bare Feet. I see the font style. Everything you can. It's plain as daylight. And so, even when I returned and the book eventually came out, and people were saying, "Oh, can't we make the cover a little more dynamic or something?" And I'm like, "Dynamic how? Like we can put the kidnappers in." And I'm like, "No, this is what the Lord showed me, and that's the way it's going to stay. If you don't like it, tough, And that book almost ended my marriage because my husband did not want this story, the details of the story, all out there. But I was instructed to write it in a certain way. Write this book raw. It's got to hurt the individual who reads it, because it's only from that pain and the hurt and the tears that you're going to cry when you read it that you can really appreciate the beauty that comes after. And that's what the Lord wanted. That's what I did. It's very rawly written. I don't think there's anybody who's read it who has not cried. And I said, okay, yes, Lord, I will do as you say. Like stupid me. Like, why didn't I stay there? I would have been at peace and not have to deal with all this nonsense in the world and crazy people. But he gave me back my kids. And I remember thinking about his voice, the beauty of his voice, which, I don't know, I'm supposed to be a writer, but it's so difficult to describe these things. His voice is a mixture of, actual words, but music and flowing water all jumbled into one. Such was the beauty of his voice. And he said, my voice, because he knew what I was thinking, he said, my voice is the most beautiful sound you will ever hear. But to those who do not belong to me, it will be the worst sound they ever hear. I said, ah. And his message, he said, Debbie, this book, Bare Feet, tralala, don't worry, I will give you the strength to write it. And believe me, I did need that. I've been writing all my life, but that was one thing I would never have chosen to write about. Blood, sweat, tears of blood you would not believe. He said, don't worry, I will tell you what to write, when to write it. I'm sending you back to life. But this is my message to the world through the book and through me. The fact that I'm even alive is I see all, I hear all. I know all that happens in the darkness and in the light, and I save. And I'm supposed to be the example, the living example that he saves. And I bowed and I said, I will, God, I will obey. And his light disappeared. And Jesus was ecstatic. He was on cloud nine. He picked me up, he swirled me around, he hugged me and kissed my head. He kissed me like all over my head and my face. And he was so happy. And he was like, you're going home to your children. Everything will be okay. But mind you, he said, it will not be easy, but it will be okay. And he took my hand and we started walking back the way that we came. And as we walked, I began gradually growing a little bit more tired every time we walked. Gradually. We got to a point and he stopped and he placed his hand on my head, and this extreme warmth, it permeated every strand of hair on my body, every cell, every atom. And I knew he was cleansing me, because having been kept captive for 2 weeks by these men who, I don't know what diseases they would have been carrying and so on, right? And I knew he was cleansing me. Now, the warmth I felt was like a fiery warmth. It was like fire, but it didn't burn like fire normally would, and as we would relate to on the earth. But it was fire. And the body I had there was able to withstand it. And I knew he cleansed me. And then we walked back to the end of the beach. And that's where I met the saints. Abraham, Moses, Isaac, Jacob. I saw the saints, but there was Mother Mary. And everybody's heads were, like down, bowed, because Jesus was there. Everybody's head is bowed in his presence, except for Mother Mary. And she looked up at me and she smiled, a mother's smile. That's the way I describe it. Filled with warmth and love, a mother's smile. And she said, my message to the earth, to the world is, God always answers the prayer of a mother. And that is a whole other powerful lesson I try to teach women. We do not know the power we possess as a woman, whether you're an actual mother or not. We were born with the ability to give life, or to bring life, not to give life, God gives life, but to bring life into the world. Just that ability gives us a certain power, especially over our children. And in that moment, I knew my mother was praying for me. Because every evening, now mind you, I was blind, I had no clue what time was whenever, but I knew, morning, evening, night kind of thing. And all that I knew was that every evening I'd feel this warm sensation go all over my body, and it was very comforting. But I just thought, there's so many injuries, who knows what's going on with my body, right? After the fact, my mom told me every evening at 6 p.m., she and my dad would sit in what used to be my old bedroom with a picture of Jesus, and they'd light a white candle and they'd pray for me. And I knew it was a combination of my prayer as a mother to be with my children and my mom's prayer for me. My mom is the most amazing person. She never cried one day for me, to the point where, my brother and they were thinking, okay, she's gone off now. She's not, because she kept saying she's coming home. She's coming. What are you fretting about? She's coming home. With such certainty, they thought, okay, she's, not handling this well. My mother knew what she was saying. Most people think I'm strong. Oh, no, 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 no. It's one thing for that to happen to me. If one of my children, God forbid, anything should happen to them, what would I do? I think that would be the end of me. I would just drop dead. But to be that strong? And so that was Mother Mary's, she appeared to me in a certain likeness, which I hunted all over, believe me, trying to find that particular image of her. I could not. I gave up years later, and in the back of an old, one of these really old antique kind of art shops, and I was killing some time before an appointment, and I'm just at the back. And there I saw it, and I said, that's her. I grabbed it immediately. I didn't care what it cost. I bought it, and I was like, okay, where'd you get this? Where did you buy this? They don't know. She said she'd get back to me. She went to the owner. It's not on their inventory. Where did it come from? Nobody knows. Who's the artist? Nobody knows. But there Mother Mary was, and it sits on the side of my table. And the image of Jesus, when I eventually did look at him, when I was returning to my body, I have that image as well on my website, where it's that painting by Akian. It's the closest likeness to him. It's not the exact thing, but closest likeness to him. And I hadn't known about it until after. And this thing popped up on I don't know what I was doing on my computer, and I saw it, and I said, oh, there's Jesus. There he is. Look at him. That's him. And, I went out and I got one. And in any event, the saints were praying, then Mother Mary continued to pray, and Jesus left me, took 2 steps back, and he left me. But just before he disappeared, he dropped Archangel Michael on my left shoulder. I just heard boom, like a rocket landing, boom, and Archangel Gabriel on my right side, same sound. And the Lord said Michael would be here to protect me for the rest of my days until my work is over, which he has been. That's a whole other story, but he is my buddy. He has been here. And Gabriel will be there to grant, if I need wisdom or understanding of something or whatever it is, call on Gabriel, he will come. Michael never left my side. Gabriel comes and goes. Michael never leaves my side, man. He is. And people have this image of angels, and they're different kinds. They're different types. Michael? No, he wipes the floor with everybody else. He is seriously, he means business. He's not all smiley and light. He is armored to the T. And I saw his sword, which I grew up seeing in my dreams as a child. I never knew what it was. That's a whole other story as well. I'll tell you, my life is... And, I saw his sword, and I knew his presence, and I knew the sound of his wings, which was not like fluttery. It was metallic, but it was soft at the same time. Solid. He's like, he shows up, and he's like, and whoever it is just exits. And that has happened to me several times. People have looked at me like this with bad intentions, and then they've just done that, bolted. Kid you not. And I would always hear it. I'd hear either the sword coming out of the sheath or I'd hear his wings. And he's my friend. But Jesus is my best friend. And I curled up into like a fetal position and I journeyed back to my body. And I remember that first painful, awful, horrible breath, then you get stuck in this meat suit. Because the freedom I experienced on my way back, that I remembered. I did not remember leaving, but I remember the journey back. It was all encompassing freedom. You're light as a feather. You can travel with the speed of thought. So if I'm thinking, I'd like to see, that planet over there. As fast as I can think it, I'm there. And I can travel in between the spaces. I don't know how else to explain it. And I could have traveled to different timelines in different universes. And I could have just done anything and been anywhere that I wanted to be with total and absolute freedom. It was like I was dancing in the air, dancing and floating and twirling. And I don't know. And then I get sucked back into this. And then you realize how horrible this human body is. Lord, not that I don't appreciate having one. I'm just saying, there's no comparison. So when I cry to go back home, it's because, this weighs you down. It's like having those, crates and trailer trucks on top of you, and then suddenly it's lifted. Like that. And I was back in my body, feeling all the pain and everything. But I knew what I knew, which was I was going home. Now, at that point in time, my file had long left anti-kidnapping and was in homicide. So they were on the hunt 3 and 4 days before from a body. There was no reason for me to be alive because no ransom was paid. Why are you keeping me alive? That's not the way kidnappings go. Okay, after 5 days, you either find a body or you've paid a ransom. They do not keep you alive longer than that because then you become a liability. Police couldn't comprehend. 2 days later, the ransom was sent, a very, very small fraction of what they wanted, but it was our life savings. And the keeper came into the room and he hugged me and he swirled me around and he kissed me in my head and he said, "Oh my gosh, you're going home, you're going home." And he was so excited. And he said, "Don't ever forget me. Don't forget me, don't forget me." And he did something that, again, has never been done. He gave me my own phone, the phone I had on me when they abducted me. He said, "I'm giving you this because you know the keypad. I'll slip it to you when you're in the backseat of the car. Hide it. When we drop you off, just count to 10 or 15, rip off your mask and call your husband. And I'm going to drop you at a place that's very close to the hospital." So he ensured that I would be as safe as possible. Police were like, "What? People don't do that. Kidnappers don't do that, right?" But he did. He kept his word. And I was dropped off at a pretty well-known location. And eventually I called my husband and when I took everything off, I couldn't see. My eyes were infected so badly. I was literally blind. So it took me a while to kind of figure out a landmark, and the police found me, bagged and tagged, and I was free. And the doctors were baffled. They told me up front, "Well, hey, there's a 98% plus chance that you've contracted HIV and other STDs." And my response to everyone was, "Okay." And they're like, "Okay, she's still traumatized," which I was, but that was not my reason. I knew that I had nothing. After months and months of testing, they could not find anything wrong with me. Well, physically, and they're like, but this doesn't add up. And, and they're trying to I was like, "It's okay. Thank you." And I left because I knew what I knew, So there it is.
So walk me through when they said you didn't have anything, and of course they have all this data, right, of previous kidnappings to go on, so they were fairly certain because they knew what they had seen before. Mm-hmm. When they told you wouldn't have anything, you sort of knew or expected that. Now, why did you expect that?
Because when Jesus blessed me, I knew he was removing everything. After all, how can I continue his work if I'm plagued with serious illnesses like HIV or different STDs? I would have to focus on that and not him, you see? Even many of the bruises on my body, because we're talking steel-tip boots, chokings, etc., etc. Even after 2 weeks, they would have left significant, marks. And they did find a few of them, but they were so faded. They were like, "Are you sure he kicked you here? Are you," to the point where they thought I was lying. I said, "Yeah, I know. How would I not know? I know what they did." But you see, when he did that, he was healing from the inside out.
Debbie, this is the kind of story, I think it shocks me and it surprises me and it amazes me on so many levels. And I think everybody listening is probably going through the same emotions that I am. But one of the most interesting things that I must have written down, I think 3 or 5 times, is multiple times throughout your story, it seems to me you're in extreme discomfort and you're in a terrible situation, much worse than any of us will ever get to experience. But then you're putting yourself second, which I don't know that I've ever seen anybody outside of what we read in the Bible and what we hear of God. But you've mentioned, when the person that you refer to as the beast, they have wronged you in so many ways. They have been such a torturer to you, and yet you're open to talking to them. You're open to, and at the same time, it's not about you, but you're telling them, there's forgiveness from the Lord. So how do you manage to, put yourself in this second place and let something else greater than you have the priority in those moments where you're fighting for your life and not certain, where your next breath will be?
See, that's the beauty of letting go. When we, and this is something that so many people have asked, when we understand our position in the grand scheme of things, and we realize just how insignificant we are compared to, just think of the vastness of the universe, which we haven't even begun to explore. How insignificant is one individual, really? The only thing that gives us power is what lives in us and who lives in us. If Christ lives in you, then you are indeed not just an insignificant little thing. You are a powerful being. And he taught me how to give over, how to take Debbie out of the equation. So think of A plus B equals C, and you're removing A from the equation, and you're pulling, he just switches up the formula. Okay? The ability to do that, meaning pull yourself out of the situation and allow him to take control, the ability to do that comes with the word we love to throw around called faith. And how do we have faith? How do we grow faith? How do we even begin to develop that kind of faith, which I did not really possess until that point in time? That's a big, big lesson, because faith is not really believing. I believe it's bright outside, yeah. But there's a difference between believing that and knowing that. It means that when I say it's bright outside, there is no controversy, there is no question mark, there is no, you cannot convince me otherwise, because I know what I know. You see? And it's the knowing that builds faith. And so I always believed in Jesus. I always loved Jesus. It's great, believe, wonderful. But do you know? And that's where the relationship is. When you have that best friend, savior relationship with him, that's when you know beyond the shadow of a doubt, he will save you somehow. And even if he doesn't save you, you don't even care, because you know that he's the one in control and he is going to navigate this situation however he sees fit. And I always liken it to this. You're driving around a hairpin bend. You can't really see what's coming. You can't. You go on blind faith. And people do it all the time. We drive around these corners in our everyday lives, and we don't know, but we drive on faith that we'll be okay, right? So what's the big... If we can do that here on earth, why can we not let Jesus, who has the bird's eye view, by the way, and he knows what's coming, and he knows if it's safe or not, if we can do all of these simple tasks in our daily lives, not knowing what's going to happen, why is it so difficult to let the Lord navigate and take the wheel and say, hey, don't go there, go this way. Don't say this, say that. Because we can only see so far as this is a mean, cruel beast to me who has done X, Y, and Z, and he does not deserve forgiveness, and he's evil, and he should be killed, and he should be hung, and that's as far as we can see with our human eyes. Why can we not trust the Lord to see that there's something deeper in him? The same God that created me created him. And while his choices were very different from mine, God gave us free will. I chose a certain path, he chose a certain path, but the same God created us. And he loves him just as much. He doesn't like what he's doing. He's unhappy with his acts, his crimes. But does that mean that he won't forgive him? No. If I grew up a certain way on the good side, and then I suddenly started doing wrong things, does Jesus stop loving me all of a sudden? No. Am I still open to forgiveness? Yes, because he created me. You see, so it's all of that wrapped up into one, that full understanding of his greatness. When we really understand just how magnificent and great and deep that love is, then it's easier to take ourselves out of the equation and become the empty vessel that we ought to be for him. And then we're able to let go. You take charge of this. Because I can't.
Now, something I think all of us would be wondering is, and I think maybe you've wondered this as well during your time being kidnapped, is why would an all-loving God, accept this being done to one of their kids? Why would they allow you going through this?
Asked that dozens of, not even dozens, hundreds, thousands of times. An all-loving God, it's like an all-loving parent. I'm raising my child. I want them to be raised a certain way and learn certain lessons and have certain morals and values. If that child strays to the point where I feel like he or she is going down the wrong path, discipline must come into play. Not violence, discipline. And so I pull up. Hey, that's not the way. So. He talks, doesn't listen again. Maybe he gets a little spanking. Comes back, then he does it again, and it's even worse. So God is a father. He's our father. He allows these things for many different reasons. In my case, he allowed it to happen to me because he knew that as much as I loved him, I was only exposed church, school, church activities, godly things, praying, whatever. I was not exposed to the dark side of life. And how can I help? I mean, who did Jesus come to save? Did he come to save those who already knew him? He came to save those who were lost. So if I was not exposed to the dark side, how would I have been in a position to help save others or help others in any other way? Because I could not relate. I had grown up on this side of the fence, not this side. So he needed to expose me to this side so that I would have that understanding and that compassion to be able to help those who really needed the help. And people go to church, but the preachers are teaching to people who don't necessarily need the teaching. They need to go out, and I've had beef with churches for that for the longest while. Why are you staying in the church or the temple or the mosque or the whatever? Go out to the people who need to hear something good, something encouraging. And I'll tell you something else. Life, everything is about perspective. Think of Job in the Bible. Job was a good, God-fearing man. Why did God took all of his children, lose his children, then lose all of his wealth, and then attack his body where he was, scorned and ostracized? Why? It's actually an expression of God's faith in Job. because the devil had to ask God's permission. Can I do so and so to him? Since you're so proud of him, right? Can I do X, Y, and Z? I bet you he'll hate you after. God says, no, go ahead. Why did God say that? He knew Job's heart would not turn against him. Okay, well, I bet if I take his body and I ruin his health, I bet then he'll curse you. Okay, go ahead, but don't kill him. Satan had to obey. He went, he did it. Did Job curse him and die? No. So we can look at these horrible things as saying, why would an all-loving God allow these things to happen? It's an expression of his faith in us, especially when it comes to this question where why do bad things happen to good people? That's an expression of God's faith in us and our love for him. And then the ball becomes in our court to prove that, yes, Lord, your trust in me, your faith in me is not wasted.
It's unbelievable, the testament that you have to the love of God. And it's, I mean, I go back to when I was studying religion in school, and, you know, because we all have to. And I think it would have been 1,000 times more effective had they have had such a discourse rather than, you know, having books and homework and things to read.
Yeah, which is a little bit of a gripe that I have. And I have nothing against teaching the Word of God from the Bible. That's what we should do. But I think the Lord sent me back having learned these lessons, and lessons that I'm still learning, by the way. Is because he kind of put me in a position to bridge that gap between, okay, this is what we are taught in the church and from the Bible, and this is how we apply it in our practical everyday life. So you see, we learn the Bible and it says, oh, forgive, love your neighbor as yourself. How? How do you forgive? How do you let go? How do you build a relationship? And that's what he has taught me. And that's what I teach people, you know, who come to me as, you know, as clients or for counseling or whatever. That's what I teach. You wake up at 3 a.m. and you want to slit your throat because your life is such a mess. That I can walk you through because he put me in a position where I've been there, you know, and it's horrible as it sounds. Again, it's perspective.
Now, on that topic, I want to understand how you managed to go, you know, from the person that was just kidnapped and then dropped off into freedom to the person you are today. Because as well as I'm certain that your body had to have a time to heal and to come back to its, you know, health and original shape, mentally, I would, you know, if you were to tell me all people are bad, you don't trust anybody, you cannot find it in yourself to do one good thing for anybody or love anybody, I would completely agree. I would say, well, that sounds fair enough given what you've been through. Yeah. You know, you could end up playing the victim card for the rest of your life because you've seen the darkest of humanity, which is something that sometimes we get glimpses on, but not most of us see, which is fortunate. Now, how do you get out of, you know, just being a victim of, I can even imagine being afraid to be in your own home, like never being able to, you know, have any kind of rest. So how do you get to where you are today?
Well, that was and continues to be a long process. There is no, don't be fooled. You know, I sit here before you and I speak a certain way, but don't be fooled. There are times, even up to last week, where I was on the floor weeping for days. Lord, I cannot do this anymore. I am exhausted. My soul is tired. Bring me home. And I'm crying, and I mean, I'm like crying out loud. Not intentionally. It was just that much pain in me. Why must I shoulder all of this? Why? I mean, how much more can I take? How many more triggers? And don't be fooled. There are still a few things that trigger me every now and then. And they pop up out of nowhere. Like you're even thinking anything about, you know, that incident, or it just kind of pops up out of nowhere. And then the devil loves to do that because it pulls you down and back into a hole. And I'll tell you, it took me Now, 3 days after I was released, I started speaking out. I started telling my story. That is not my strength. That's the Lord's strength. I was not afraid to be in my home, the home from which I was taken. In fact, I refused. My husband said, well, let's move. Let's, find another place or migrate or whatever. I flat refused. I said, they've taken enough from me. They're not taking my home. I'm staying here. Again, not me, all him. It was, if you are not rooted and grounded solidly and deeply into the ground in the Lord, there's no way you can withstand the storm that comes after. Because yes, the abduction and the rapes and all of that, it was horrible. It was beyond horrible. But you know what comes after? It's worse after. Because now you have to come to terms with the fact that that actually happened. That happened to my body. And this was said to me, and I got kicked here, and I got that there, and this smell reminds me of that, and whatever. And you've got all of these things coming at you. But the difference is you have your family present now. Your parents are there, your brother is there, your friends are there, and they all mean well, but they're not able to help you. No one is able to help you. Psychiatrists, psychologists, therapists, no one was able to help me. Not that they weren't well trained, some of the best in the world could not help me, for the simple reason that they could not look me in the eye and say, Debbie, I understand. You don't understand. Don't tell me you understand. There was no one for me. And therefore, the Lord sent me back to be that person for others. I'm filling the gap. And it took me many years to get the book done. It almost cost me my marriage. I lost a lot of people from my life because they thought these things should not be spoken about and discussed in an open forum or anything of the sort. And I was like, I don't care. When the Lord sends a storm, what is uprooted in a storm? Anything that's not solidly grounded, it's going to fly. And if it flies, it means it wasn't strong in the first place and had no place being there. And he removed, and I feel so isolated sometimes, and I feel so lonely sometimes. But that's what he needs. That's what the Lord wants. So you keep focus on him. And don't get me wrong. This is not an easy journey. After I've had times where I felt like maggots were crawling in my skin. And if you read my book, there are all the details. Because you feel so filthy after being raped. You feel gutted. You feel like everything is just ripped out inside of you. And there's this big old hole. And you don't know what you're supposed to fill it with because something was taken from you that was yours and yours alone. You just don't know what to do with it. You don't know what to do with yourself. And I looked myself in the mirror one day, unfortunately, and I broke down. I did not know who I was looking at. And I had to deal with that. And I didn't know how. And I remember I started scraping my skin to the point where I was starting to actually hurt myself. Because I could have sworn there were maggots crawling all over me, and I would spend sometimes hours in the bathroom just trying to wash the filth off. It's not something you can wash off. It's a filth that you feel from the inside that the devil loves. And that's why he was trying to break me. But I know what it's like to have a knife here because I just can't take it anymore. I know what it's like to have a knife here because, and I mean not just there as in, okay, I'm going to do this. Okay, I mean as in here, as in, okay, I'm ready. I don't care. Fully well knowing where that hell exists. And still I was ready to do that. That's how horrible the aftermath is, the PTSD, the anxiety, the depression. And even now, if I have to choose between two places to visit and one is way less crowded than the other, I'll choose the one that's less crowded. I prefer not to have people jostling around me and touching me and rubbing against me. So there are things that will always surface. It's like living with a disease that you have to control and temper all the time. It's a continuous battle. Don't let anybody who tells you different, they don't know what they're saying or they're lying. You have to control this and temper it for the rest of there's no escaping it. And then somebody says something that triggers you and you're back in a hole. And you got to crawl out of that hole. But you see, I use my stepping stones as the word of God to crawl out of that hole. And it's not easy and it takes time. Sometimes I'm out for an entire week. I don't want to see anybody. I don't want to hear anybody. Because I'm wallowing in my own misery. And That's just a little part of what I teach, that people think that's wrong. No, we're living a human experience. You're allowed to feel crappy. You're allowed to be angry. You're allowed to be miserable and sad. But then there comes a point. Do I sink? Do I keep swimming, or do I float? And my teaching, one of my teachings is, through the Lord, of course, is, if you're not strong enough to swim right now, don't fight it. Don't fight the current. Don't fight the wave. Float. Lie back and let the waves carry you. Who's in control of the waves? He is. Lay back and let the wave carry you. When you gain enough strength and you feel like you can paddle again, you can swim again, then swim. When you can't do it, float again. That's what you have to do.
Absolutely. And I have to say, I have heard of one other person that mentioned feeling like worms or maggots were inside her skin and self-harming because she wanted to get them out.
It's that vivid.
I cannot even begin to imagine what that feels like. But that's the last thing that I want to get to ask you. And to be honest, I wasn't planning on asking you this, but somehow while you were talking about how it feels to live in the aftermath of what happens, it just came to me that I think it's important for everybody to understand. Now, most of us, just like most of the people around you, will not have had even a fraction of your experience. So, of course, when they try to be helpful, when they try to comfort you, when they try to help, there's no way they can even begin to understand what you need or how to even comfort you. If any of us have anybody in our lives that has been through unspeakable events, what would your advice be to how can we be helpful to those people? What could somebody have done for you afterwards to make you feel just a bit better or a tiny bit less crappy?
I think just be there in silence, because like I said, maybe I started speaking out about 3 days after I was released, but I started really counseling people maybe about a year after. I was nowhere near being healed, but I started doing it because the Lord said to. And my approach to those individuals was, if they were willing to look me in the eye, I looked them in the eye, because I know that eye contact will tell them that I know. And on the occasions that has happened, they've looked at me and they knew that I knew, they would break down and they would start crying and they would tell me. Others would refuse to look me in the face. And I'd just simply say they just need to know that there's someone who understands and cares and is willing to listen without judgment. And that without judgment is very important. And so I would say, wouldn't touch. I wouldn't even try to hold her hand or, touch her shoulder or back, because anything could be a trigger. So I just sit there with my hands on my lap and be like, I'm Debbie, I'm here, I've been through this. If you want to talk, talk. If you don't want to, that's okay. Just know that I'm here. And then I would sit there in silence for a period of time. And if they decided they didn't want to talk at all, I'd just be, okay, that's fine. Whenever you're ready, here's my number, it's my name, whatever. Eventually, they always get to that point, because that's not something you can hold inside. It festers. It festers and gets infected, and it gets the gangrene. This is just a relatable comparison here. And eventually, at some point in their lives, they have no choice but to revisit what happened, because it festers. So I would say the best approach is, yes, it's not, now nothing is wrong with recommending, okay, let's try this counselor or whatever it is, depending on the age of the victim, but it should never be forced. It should always be that individual's choice. Do I want to see a therapist? No, not right now. Even if it's an underaged individual, don't force. That person will know, hey, I'm at the point where maybe I can consider it. If you push and if you force, then you're just as bad. I mean, you mean well, but it's doing just as much damage to that individual. You let everything happen in their timing. Don't tiptoe around them. Just act as though everything's somewhat normal, but be careful with the touching. Or now there's no way to know what all the triggers would be, but don't tiptoe around, and because then that makes them more aware. Well, everybody's treating me like something's wrong and whatever. Just let them know you're there. You go about your duties and your things you normally do, and eventually, when that person is ready, they will come. And I always tell people, feel free to give out my contact information. If they feel they need to contact and talk, no problem, I am here. If they're not ready, but they're ready 5 years from now, no problem, God willing, I'll still be here. But they need to know that they will not be judged. I was judged. Someone very, very close and near and dear to me blamed me for being kidnapped, blamed me for being raped, because I didn't fight hard enough. And so I had to deal with that on top of everything else. So you want to be someone who is just there, non-judgmental. Just listen. Don't say anything. Don't give advice. We mean well, trust me. We mean well with the advice, but do not give advice. Just listen. They want to cry, give them a tissue. They want to hug you, hug them, but let it be their move. Do not give advice unless they ask.
I think that's the best advice always, right? That we shouldn't advise unless we're asked to. I think that's the kindest and the most overrated advice ever, because we always tend to and since I've noticed that, I'm always just baffled at how much advice, not asked for advice, just comes to me on a daily basis.
Yeah, if I need your advice, I'll ask. Leave me alone,
But that's so true. And somebody who has been through a traumatic event, her husband took his life. She also mentioned, don't even begin to say that you understand, because you don't. Unless you've been in the same situation, you do not, which is okay. But then just hold space, which is exactly what you've said. Mm-hmm. Don't expect to have the answers, because a lot of times people don't come to us for answers or for advice. They just need space, and that's the best thing we can give them.
We need space, or sometimes we just need to be heard. I mean, the advice is coming from a good place. I get that, but when you give advice, you're going on the assumption that you know what's best.
Yeah.
You don't.
No.
I mean, there are people who've come to me with similar issues where lost. A spouse or a child and whatnot. And I never pretend that I know. I said, hey, listen, I can only imagine. I will not tell you I know, because I don't. I have not been there. If you don't, you don't. Don't try to pretend you do.
Exactly. Now, Debbie, I want to say that you're just an incredible human being, probably one of the most impressive people that I've ever had the honor of speaking to. You're incredibly strong and resilient, and I think the one part that impresses me the most about you is your vulnerability and your ability to be open after everything that you've been through. Because everything you've shared with us, and that you share even more graphically in your book, it takes a lot of courage, and it takes a lot of what we see as shame and putting ourselves down. You need to overcome those things to be able to share that in a public forum. So I never take it lightly that people talk about these things, and that you talked about it. I always liken it to a wound that hasn't really healed, that we're now sort of scratching. Yep. And you're agreeing to us scratching it together. So it's not fun, it's not comfortable. And I think the reason why we do this, for myself, but also for you, is because we think there's lessons that other people can learn without having those wounds that we kept picking on for this last hour. So I want to thank you for doing this with me, and tell you you're absolutely amazing. Now, you've mentioned the book that you wrote, and that you also do counseling. if anybody wants to find out more about you or reach out, how can they find you?
Well, I will send you the link, but my website would be the best place. It's Debbie, DEBBIE, Ali, ALI.com. It's got all about me. You can book sessions on there. You can get to my book from there as well. I'm all out of stock, but it will redirect you to Amazon where you can get your copy. And yeah, so you can book your counseling there. Everything. It's all good. I try not to give out my number because then my phone is nonstop. But I think my website would be best. Yeah, and I'll pass that on to you so you can post it as well.